Welcome to TSNN's monthly webinar series. Today's webinar will discuss the topic of thinking of taking your show overseas? Learn from the experts. You can submit a question at any time during the session, so please join in. Alternatively, you can join the conversation and ask questions on Twitter at hashtag TSNNwebinar. And now, Arlene Shows, Marketing Manager for TSNN, would like to say a few words.
Warm greetings to everyone. Here at TSNN, we are excited to dive into the complexities of venturing overseas and discussing the advantages this can bring to a show and a brand. We are fortunate enough to have the perfect panel to educate us today, so thanks for tuning in. First, a big thanks to our sponsor today, OnStream Media. They once again help us deliver all of these educational topics to you. All of TSNN's webinars are brought to you, as a matter of fact, by OnStream Media, the leader in multimedia webinar and webcasting services. Their technology can help you get better results for your own organization. OnStream's virtual event solutions can connect you with colleagues and customers, extend the value of your events, and boost profits. Webinars and webcasts provide a platform for branded virtual events that can enhance the value of a live show or operate as single revenue-generating events. For a free demo and to learn more about how OnStream webinars and webcasts bring measurable ROI, visit onstreammedia.com. Now allow me to introduce a real international trade show expert who will moderate today's session. Stephanie Selznick, CEM and President of International Trade Information Incorporated. As a veteran U.S. and global exhibition industry speaker, Stephanie has worked with exhibitions and exhibitors in many sectors, including agricultural, apparel, consumer electronics, food and beverage, high-tech construction, energy, entertainment, and travel, all over the world. She's in a unique position to understand the international marketplace as she works with a number of U.S. trade shows, increasing their international reach. One of her specialties is helping international exhibitors succeed participating in U.S. exhibitions and helping U.S. exhibitors succeed in shows overseas. Stephanie blogs weekly for Expo Magazine, contributes to Exhibition World and Conferences and Meetings World, and lives in Las Vegas when she's not on an airplane. She's a longtime member and the community engagement ringleader for CISO, the Society of Independent Show Organizers. Stephanie, we're very happy to have you. The floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Arlene. Welcome, everybody. We're thrilled to have you, and I'd like to thank Rachel and the TSNN team for inviting us to speak on this very timely subject. With that, we're going to get going. I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, and then we're going to go ahead and get into some content. Tom, why don't you go ahead and start off?
Yes, hello, everybody. My name is Tom Cindric. I'm the Vice President here at Hanley Wood. I've been in the trade show industry 23 years and have spent the last 13 years working on Hanley Wood's commercial events, shows like World of Concrete, Construct, and I've also been involved in the AIA event. Certainly over the last 13 years, Hanley Wood has had a focus on international and growing our international audience both domestically and globally, and we've gone from launching a show in Mexico in 2004 and then recently announced launching a show in India that we'll talk a little bit about today. So very excited to be here and hope I can enlighten all of you.
Thanks, Tom. And Larry, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everybody. My name is Larry Schur. I'm president of All Baby and Child, which produces the ABC Kids Expo, as well as educational conference for the juvenile industry trade. Our event is an annual event. It's only 10 years old at this point, and we have a large international contingent of which has grown in the 10 years exponentially. We also produce an educational conference just for the independent specialty store market. So while I'm really not the expert in the group, I am the newbie, and we are, for the first time, have taken events abroad, and we hope you'll find the information that we provide useful in starting into the global marketplace or for future international expansion. So being the newbie out there, we've encountered a lot of interesting things, and if you haven't taken your event abroad, I'm hoping this information will convince you to do so. So back to Stephanie.
Yeah, Larry and his group recently they did their first offshore pavilion in England in the midst of a 50-year blizzard. Actually hit the show, and next month we're going over to Shanghai for another juvenile and baby kids expo. So lots to learn and lots to go on. What we're going to do first is take a little poll, and we want to just kind of get a feel for the audience. So I'm going to go ahead and throw it up there. How many of you are presently engaged in taking your show offshore? Number 1, no plans at this time. Number 2, looking into it. Number 3, geo-cloning our show. That's the new big word, taking your show overseas, but working with those people in other countries to do it right, their way. Number 4, we're producing pavilions and shows offshore. And number 5, we're doing both geo-cloning and pavilions. So with that, we'll let everybody vote. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and end the poll and share the results with everyone. So it looks like we've got some people that are not, some people that are looking into it, and then a couple of people doing pavilions and doing both. So we wanted to just make sure that we're speaking to those, to the majority of you. And those that are looking into it or no plans at this time, but you may be thinking about it, will work. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. Cancel that. All right. So how do you know your organization is ready to go offshore? Tom, why don't you kick it off?
Okay. I think that there's three. There could be 3 reasons. I think when I look at it, I'd say number 1 is that your brand is recognized globally. As an example, World of Concrete, which is the main show that I work on here at Hanley Wood, is a globally recognized brand. And when I say globally recognized, it means that it has, there are international exhibitors currently exhibiting in the U.S. show. It has a strong international visitor presence, roughly 25%. And, I think if your brand is recognized by the global industry as a key event, then certainly it lends it more opportunity to bring it to other countries, makes it easier because people recognize the brand. I think the second thing is if your event, maybe your brand is not recognized globally, but the brand or your event fills a void in the marketplace. As an example, many of you have read that Hanley Wood has acquired the Greenbuild show, and one of the global strategies is to help that organization or help that event fill a void in the marketplace, although that brand is recognized in the U.S., maybe not so much globally. And then the last thing I think is, whether your brand's recognized globally or whether there's a void, your exhibitors want to go. And if your exhibitors want to go and expand globally, then there may be reason for your show to do it. And it may be in a two-phase process where, as Larry's doing, you're bringing exhibitors internationally in a small pavilion, and then maybe there's long-term opportunity to create an event. All
right. And Larry, why don't you walk us through how you made the decision to start doing pavilions?
Okay. Well, first of all, I noticed from the poll that a lot of people that are participating in this call have not launched events internationally, and some of them are thinking about it, and a good percentage of actually doing pavilions. So that's good. Over the past few years, the international attendance at our U.S. event has been soaring to the point where we now have registered attendees from 66 different countries. We stepped up our international trade advertising frequency, so the increase wasn't a total surprise, but it was still a greater number than we had expected. 10 years ago, we only had attendees from 3 countries, and now we're up to 66. So with a pretty much tapped-out mature market here in the U.S., it definitely made sense for us to start looking at opportunities overseas, as well as helping our exhibitors expand their base and see if we could generate increased international exhibitor attendance at our event. So we are a very small organization. We have 9 people on our team producing a 1 million square foot show plus the educational conference I mentioned. So we don't have the resources, the time, the money, or the personnel to start a show completely from scratch. In addition, there were also very established shows in the countries that we identified as growth markets for us. So about a year, we invited a few of the show organizers in the international shows that we identified as growth markets. We invited them to visit our U.S. show and meet with us to determine if there was a potential interest, maybe in co-locating, marketing our events together, or maybe some other combination. And we found that in every case, there was great interest from the other countries that we invited, and everybody felt that pavilions were the best way to go. So not a lot of personnel, not a lot of time, not a lot of dollars involved, yet it provided us immediate visibility to our country and them to for us to go to their country and them to come to our country, and the opportunity to expand quickly into multiple international destinations. So what we did is we developed reciprocal agreements whereby we would host a North American pavilion with our international partners in their shows, and they would do the same at our U.S. event. So I guess it depends on what your objectives are. Yes, it would be nice to make some money on the international ventures, and I think that'll happen over time. But our goal was to build attendance at our U.S. event, while at the same time showing our manufacturers ways that they can build their business by helping them enter new markets and hopefully be profitable as well. So we're finding there are more international manufacturers that want to exhibit at our event here in the U.S. than U.S. manufacturers actually interested in exhibiting overseas. So we're actually benefiting with this increased international exhibitor participation. Then, as Stephanie mentioned, our first international event was held just this past March in the U.K., where we could get our feet wet and still be able to communicate in English. And as Stephanie also mentioned, despite the worst blizzard that hit the area in over 50 years, and that took place on the first day of the event, the venture was a success. More and more people came to the event the second day, and the third was the last day. Third day was actually the busiest day of the show because it was the snow had finally subsided. And we have created a huge demand from British exhibitors wanting to come to our event in the U.S. this October. There were quite a few U.S. exhibitors that we couldn't get to go on our first venture over the U.K. They were waiting on the side to see how it went before they would commit to year two. And now we have a pretty big demand for year two going to the U.K. While we were in the U.K., we also met with our international partners from some of these other shows and events.
Larry?
Yes.
I'm going to cut you off for a second, and we're going to move on to the next one because I think we're going into that answer.
Oh, okay, sure.
Right here, which is Q2, which is recommending some internal and external sources for going offshore.
Okay.
Because I think that's where you're headed with your
right.
When you were overseas. So when you were overseas in England, you had a chance to meet with the partners, right?
Yes, we met with the partners overseas, and we had meetings with them to firm up our plans, and also we met with other countries while we were there to see if this concept would work as far as they were concerned. So it was very beneficial for us to be there regardless. And as Stephanie mentioned, our next venture is coming up in July in China. But we felt that it was important to have a single go-to person as far as resources for both our pavilions overseas as well as the international pavilions for our U.S. event. So what we did is we assigned one of our younger, energetic, and enthusiastic team members to handle both. And this single resource helps simplify the communication process and helps funnel information really where it needs to go, and there's a lot less confusion. Externally, it helps to know exactly with whom you're dealing, and hopefully you can get it down to a single contact overseas and develop a cordial relationship with that person whereby that person is really available when you need them despite the time differences and the holidays that take place. It also helps to have an already established relationship with a freight forwarder or consolidator, and I think Tom's going to talk about this in a little while. Even though the international destination will usually recommend one, and if nothing else, you will need their services for freight being shipped back to the U.S. From their destinations.
Absolutely. Tom, what about what kind of internal and external resources do you recommend?
Well, there's a lot of resources out there. Certainly. Hold on one second. I was like, wait, I'm on speaker. How'd that happen? There's a lot of resources out there to help you, and certainly for, everything from consultants like Stephanie and Sharif and some of the folks that we all meet at IEE. But I think what Larry is saying is very true. For us, it's a lot about developing relationships, and when you have a brand that does have a global global appeal, and you have global exhibitors, and you have global partners. What we've learned through our launch in Mexico and now our launch in India is there are a lot of people out there that you already know that you know through your shows and your events that are operating globally that can help you and support you. As an example, the Las Vegas Convention and Visitors Authority runs trade missions every year to many, many countries, and we've always participated. I participated in an India trade mission about 8 years ago, and honestly, that was sort of the catalyst for, hey, we would love to bring World of Concrete to India. It just took us 7 or 8 years to get there in terms of making contacts and finding a local partner, and getting the relationships that you need to get things going. So recently, last year, I was in Thailand, and you'd be amazed at what Thailand is trying to do to bring show organizers into that country in terms of helping with the venue, helping you understand the marketplace, even providing financial support for things that you're doing. So there's a lot of internal and external sources out there, and there's a lot of people that are here that can help with that.
Yeah, I would also add that the Department of Commerce International Trade Administration can be quite helpful. President Obama's export initiative is basically the idea of doubling the number of exports that we have going overseas from the United States. And so you can find sector specialists in almost every country on the planet who has been charged with assisting you, whether you're part of the International Buyers Program or not. So there are a lot of different sources, and those people, also the Foreign Service nationals at the various posts around the world, U.S. posts around the world, are the ones that do the position papers. If you're looking to see how your sector is, whatever sector that you're in, you can actually go to the website, which is, I think, if you Google it, what is it, something.gov. I'll come back to it. But they actually do have country reports and sector reports that are updated usually every 2 to 3 years, and they can be quite helpful if you're looking at going in. The other thing that I think really highlighted, both gentlemen highlighted, is that having a local partner is key. Having cordial relationships with people is key, and these relationships don't just happen overnight. So with that, we're going to move on. All right, Tom, so what kind of advice do you have on shipping, lead times, and customs for small and medium enterprises?
Well, I think a lot of it, a lot of the shipping time and customs issues, it depends on the type of event that you're doing. So I think that, in the case of if you have an equipment show and you're expecting exhibitors to ship large pieces of equipment, then, you're certainly going to have need more lead time and have to have a great freight forwarder. And you really need to have, in a lot of cases, you need to have someone on the U.S. that understands your exhibitor's business and can help it get into the country, and then perhaps another freight forwarder that's on the other side receiving information, receiving and getting and helping to get the product back out of the country. So, we have events where in a lot of cases we recommend companies, purchase the Shell Scheme booth and bring product that's efficient, and maybe not take so much equipment the first time. If you have smaller tools and smaller products, then it's a lot easier to get it in and out of the country than if you have big machinery. And certainly, Stephanie, you can speak, more about that because with your experience.
Yeah, what we would do is a lot of our shows, especially the ones in Mexico, is the large equipment manufacturers would actually pre-sell their equipment and split the shipping costs. So they would ship down the equipment to the venue, use it as use it for the exhibit, and then what they would do is they would have their clients who had bought the machinery pick it up and take it off. And so it was a very clean and more cost-effective way for the really large equipment. Again, these things always take time, and it's really important to have, when you pick a freight forwarder, you need to make sure that you have somebody who's got offices in those countries or a really good reciprocal agreement like Tom was talking about, because you need to have somebody who's on the ground there and who's experienced in trade shows. A lot of your exhibitors will say, well, we always ship with so-and-so and so-and-so, but if the shipment is 3 days too late, well, you've missed the show. So it's got to be on time, and that's why we always recommend that you use real trade show freight forwarders for whatever it is that you do. All right. So, Tom, we're going to talk about the role of distributors and why we should care.
Distributors really play a key role for any international event. I think that typically what we've seen is you have U.S. companies that want to go international. This happened on our Mexico show. We saw the first year that the manufacturer would go into Mexico and then would find a local distributor for future, distribution and getting their product throughout the country. And then the next year, that distributor would actually be exhibiting. So, when we initially started, it was, hey, we want those manufacturers to be there. And as we got into it, we realized, no, this is what we're trying to do. We're trying to foster these relationships and help our exhibitors find these distributors, and that actually it makes it easier for them to exhibit the next year and participate in future years. So, I think that those of you that look at taking events, even our India event, we're looking at, and I think we're going to talk about this later, most of our exhibitors will be domestic from India, and many of those will be distributors who are distributing the product. So it's important for you to have, communicate that with your exhibitors and help them find those. If they don't have distributors, set up programs. You can work with the DOC. You can work with the local organizations to help your exhibitors find distributors that long term will help your show grow and strengthen your show.
And the other thing with distributors, of course, is it really is the most efficient way to get your product around the country. If you're going to ship direct to clients, it gets very expensive, and so there are a lot of different ways that you can do it. But some countries you have national distributors, and some they're regional. It just depends on the size of the country. And I think for India that would really be true, wouldn't it, Tom?
Really, one of the main reasons that India is a good marketplace for us is many of our large manufacturers are already operating in the country, and they're producing and manufacturing equipment, or they have large distribution, and it's key. And like you said, it's if you have exhibitors that can rely on those people for product, then they save on all the shipping costs, customs costs, and many people that are doing shows in Brazil understand the challenges of getting equipment in and out of that country and the tariffs and the fees. And so being able to have distribution of exhibitors' products in the country, and makes it a lot easier to get in your show.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And in the case of Brazil especially, which it can be really hard to get stuff in and out of, if your equipment's already there and you've already got a distributor, if your exhibitors already do, then you can talk them into a bigger space to show the actual equipment instead of just a 10 by 10 or the equivalent of a 9-meter booth. So, all right, we're going to move on. All right, Larry, what kind of advice would you give to everybody for taking your exhibitors offshore?
Well, I guess the first piece of advice I would give is to start as early as you can, probably at least a year in advance, because it'll take a considerable amount of time to get exhibitors on board and convince them not to be afraid of the commitment they're about to embark on. And like Tom, our larger exhibitors are already there. They're at these shows overseas. So we're really working with our medium and smaller size manufacturers and try to hook them up, as you mentioned before, with distributors. Many of them really want to expand internationally, but they're afraid to take the first step. And it's a hand-holding process, at least in our industry. And there's some convincing that needs to take place before a commitment's made. We had to lay out the facts, why they could not afford to pass up the opportunity, and give them show demographics as well as country demographics, which is provided by the international destination. And as you talked about a little bit, in order to consolidate and ship the freight, ocean freight, at the least cost, they need to know that there is at least a 3-month or whatever the lead time is to get those products to be consolidated to ship over. Otherwise, there's going to be a pretty big cost to ship them by air unless they can put them in their suitcase. So preparing each potential exhibitor with an estimate of the costs involved is very important, and it shows them that you know what you're doing, even though in our case we don't yet, but we're trying. They're looking for you for guidance and support, which is hard to do for the first time. But we found that some exhibitors really wanted to be in on the ground floor of a new venture, and they want to say they were first, and hopefully that they think that'll get them preferential treatment in the future. But for the first year, we paid for their hotel lodging, the ones that went with us for our first venture in the UK, up to 3 nights. We hosted a welcome cocktail reception the night before the show at their hotel to get them talking and networking with each other. Halfway through the show, we hosted an American-themed wine and cheese reception at our stand there, and we pre-invited attending media and distributors. And during that 2-hour reception, that area of the show, our North American Pavilion, was the most crowded area of the entire event. So it got recognized, it got a lot of traffic, and our exhibitors were pretty happy about it. But tying that into the education, the exhibitors really need to be educated before arriving at the event, and they need to know what to expect when they arrive to an international venue. And depending on the number of exhibitors, it could be done on a webcast or on an individual basis. But even the basics, which we might take for granted, they need to have a valid passport. They might need a visa. Where's their hotel located? How do they get there? Where's the venue in relationship to the hotel, and how do they get there? When can they set up and tear down? What's included with their stand and what's not? What events are planned during their visit? What are they going to do with the product after the event? Is there country protocol and customs, currency, electric conversions, translators? There's a whole host of things that you might take for granted that they need to know about. And the more you communicate with them in advance about it, the better off you'll be, and the better the flow will go once at the event. And again, that close relationship with the international event organizers that we talked about earlier will help you obtain the answers you need and ensure a well-organized event. And finally, I think that as we talked about before, and I'm not advertising her services, but it helps to have an international consultant like Stephanie by your side, really helping you plan the event, identifying the resources and contacts, and actually traveling with you to the event, at least initially, to make sure everything runs smoothly. So that's my take on it.
Larry, we've got a question from Rachel, and she wanted to know how many exhibitors need to buy in to really have a pavilion. And then Tom, to you, how many do you think that you really need to have an entire show overseas?
Well,
Larry.
I'll start with the pavilion. I think a bare minimum would be 10 exhibitors. I think you can do a pavilion effectively with 10. Plus, you want to have your own presence in that pavilion with your own stand and maybe an area for a lounge area to do some food and beverage functions. So 10 to 15 would be a good start.
Yeah, you can go as low as 6, but it's a lot of expense and it's a lot harder to have a critical mass and a bigger presence. We have seen that, I think, also here in the U.S. We've seen shows with as few as 6 people or 6 companies. But again, having a networking area is really important. Having a place where your exhibitors can go and bring clients and sit down outside of their booths is really important because a 10 by 10 really isn't that large. Tom, what do you think in terms of a critical mass on an overseas show?
I think on a launch, you'd hope to have 200 exhibitors. Certainly 150 to 200 exhibitors, and anywhere from 2,000 to 2,500 square meters, which is roughly 20 to 25,000 square feet. And again, I think that was our goal in Mexico, which we achieved, and that's our goal for India in terms of the first year launch, and then certainly year 2 and year 3, you grow on that.
Oh, absolutely. And again, it's working with the other organizers as well overseas to assist with that. Okay, so let's talk, Tom. Maybe let's talk a bit about the mix of international and domestic exhibitors and kind of how that works together.
I can talk about Mexico. We initially thought our mix would be 70-30, 70 U.S., 30 Mexico, and I think we ended up more in that 50-50 range. But again, a lot of those people were distributors. So when you say, well, what does that mean? Are they U.S. companies or not? India, we're really looking at a 70-30 mix, meaning 70 domestic Indian, meaning coming from India, and 30 international, meaning the U.S. and the rest of the world. So personally, I feel that it's key to be able to have a strong domestic marketplace and participation, because those exhibitors are in country. Those exhibitors can get equipment there, or services there. Those exhibitors understand obviously the culture and how to operate and how to sell, and so it helps your mix if you can have a stronger, at least on a launch. Again, we're talking about launching. If you know you can have a large domestic in-country mix, then I think that helps you. I think it helps your audience. It helps your attendance as well.
Yeah, it's something that we found as our shows in Mexico matured, is we did have shows that were as much as an 80% U.S., 20% Mexican mix. And towards the end, it really kind of changed over, but it was because so many of our U.S. companies had found distribution. The challenge, of course, was then they were no longer taking their own proprietary booths, which is not good on the bottom line. And so what we did is we went to the U.S. exhibitors and said, listen, there are 4 different companies, 4 of you that are being distributed by this one company. What if you each kicked in some money and helped your distributor have a larger booth, therefore a bigger presence, and also sent somebody down to make sure that your stuff is getting sold the way that you want it to? And as a result, by thinking creatively and a little bit out of the box, we were actually able to grow the show in that way, even though theoretically we were shrinking. So then we went to the numbers of brands as well as exhibiting companies and all of our marketing materials. But it is something that inherently happens when you take a show overseas. And also when you take a pavilion overseas, the same thing happens, because organically, the companies are going to find distribution, move out of your pavilion, and then it's a way to bring in new companies as well. Larry, do you have anything to add with that?
No, the only thing I was going to say.
How did you find?
Yeah, I found exactly the same thing. The only thing I was going to say is that the other option you have is if the distributor does a lot of brands in the U.S., you might be able to get that distributor to have a dual presence, one in the location where they're at, and another because the pavilions attract a lot of attention, especially if you look on the screen there, you'll see some of our signage, and there was banners all over the place, and it definitely got attention. So they might want a presence in your pavilion, if you're doing a North American pavilion or a U.S. pavilion. They might also want presence there to get across those brands.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is it's important to not, I think you have to focus domestic and internationally together. In a lot of cases, you're communicating with your U.S. Your U.S. manufacturer, and they maybe have a distributor or they have a presence in the country that you're looking at, and you might need your partner to be working that angle and kind of collaboratively selling your event, working together, not so much of, hey, I'm going to get credit for the sale, or I'm going to get credit for the sale, but hey, let's work together. How do we get this manufacturer to get their product in the show, regardless if it's coming out of the U.S. or through distribution? And I think that's a mindset that you have to have in terms of, we certainly didn't look at that on our first launch. We wanted to sell everything we could, but as you said, Stephanie, as the shift takes place and you find how important the local distribution of the product is, and sometimes you have to sacrifice, getting a solo booth for a manufacturer. You have to sacrifice that for, hey, this distributor can handle the show, and they're going to stay in the show, and the exhibitor ultimately is getting their product sold at the show and distributed. And it's one of those things where you have to find a balance.
Oh, absolutely. I would definitely agree with that. And finding the balance is key. And it's also, working with the local people and paying attention to how business is done. The other thing is that what happened with this show, the pavilion that we took over to this particular show that we're looking at the slide of, was we did actually reach out to the U.S. Department of Commerce folks, the commercial specialists at the embassy in London, And she actually went through, looked at all the exhibitors, and tried to set up some meetings and actually did some outreach and some export counseling, which was invaluable. And it was our tax dollars at work. We didn't have to pay additional money for it. So, again, there are a lot of different resources out there. The other thing, of course, I would suggest is working with the Chambers of Commerce in country, the American Chambers of Commerce, to see if they've got any additional assistance that can be given.
Right. The other thing,
obviously, yes. Go ahead, Larry.
The other thing I was going to suggest is some of these countries, they pay for their exhibitors or manufacturers to come to your show in the U.S. It might not be the same for U.S. going there, but for them coming to your show in North America or the U.S., there's dollars that they allocate for that, and we're finding that out in spades with the U.K. So something to think about.
Yeah, there are the export promotion agencies based here in the United States are really helpful for that because they do have the funding to subsidize participation. Unfortunately, in the U.S., our government doesn't do that, but there are some state governments that also have export promotion agencies that you can get funding from that will sponsor pavilions within your pavilion or pavilions within your shows offshore. So it's another really good source of money. All right, we're gonna go to the last question here. And this is always a good one because, oh my gosh, I wish I had known. So, Tom, what's the one thing you wish you had known before you embarked on the process of going offshore?
How easy it is? No, I'm just kidding. I think that number one is there are certainly going to be cultural challenges that you have to understand in terms of most of the events we've done. We've had sort of the three-partner, the three-stool where we have ourselves plus our local partner who's typically an experienced organizer and then an association. And in most of the cases, we've found how challenging, how important the local association is, but how challenging that can be in terms of politically what they're trying to accomplish and politically what you're trying to do with the show. I think the other thing is tax laws. A lot of cases we get into these events and we don't understand how are we getting money in the country and getting money out of the country. So you really need to do your homework on that and be, talk to people that are doing business in the countries that you're thinking about working in, and what have they done to get money in and out, and those are the two real big things that I would say.
All right, Tom, I'm gonna put you on the spot here. So there was a World of Concrete Mexico, and eventually it went away.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any big lessons that you learned with that particular expo?
Well, I mean, that show was a great show for us. We had a fairly good Latin America is a big audience for World of Concrete. We launched that show in 2004. The timing was right. The show did well, got up to almost 3,500 square meters, 35,000 square feet. Unfortunately for us, Mexico suffered the same kind of challenges we had in 07 or 09, and I guess starting in 08, 09, and 10, and really just became challenging for us to have the event because of people were really focused on just trying to stay afloat. The one thing that did happen though was once the show was stopped, our Latin American Mexico attendance on World of Concrete actually went up. So we felt like while we weren't doing the show anymore, we had operated in the country for 5 years. We had really expanded the brand and highlighted the brand in Latin America, and we had helped to create more awareness of our event and more awareness of World of Concrete. And as a result, when the show ended up not being in Mexico City, we still had this influx of attendees. So I think that's the thing. We would have loved to have continued that show in Mexico. It didn't work out that way, but we still continue to gain the benefit of a strong Latin American attendance, and we attribute a lot of it to having been in that country for so many years.
Yeah, and again, it is really important in terms of the culture and those things. And some organizations are very afraid to either take pavilions offshore or to take their shows offshore because they're afraid that they're going to actually damage the U.S. brand.
Right.
I think that some shows have gone a little too bonkers with it, but when done correctly and establishing those relationships and things, you actually do end up driving more attendance to the mother show.
Yeah, and the great thing, for us, we run out of Dallas, so for us to go to Mexico, it's a 2-hour flight. With India, it's a 14.5-hour or 12.5-hour time difference, so you just can't hop on a plane and be there in 2 hours.
Absolutely. So, Larry, what's the one thing that you wish you had known before we embarked on the process of going offshore?
Well, I guess it's kind of on a lighter note, and Tom actually just picked up on this. I guess the thing I didn't initially realize is that I would actually have to travel to these events. And I'm not sure what I was thinking, but I went from essentially zero international travel to lots of 12 and 18-hour plane rides. So you have to spell out the time and allot the time to actually go to these events. And I found that a 2-hour layover at Heathrow was not enough time to make a connection. So live and learn with that. But I also didn't anticipate the amount of hand-holding and convincing it was going to get to take our manufacturers to come abroad with us to just help them to help themselves. But it doesn't seem to be the same the other way. With international exhibitors, at least at our event, participating in our U.S. events, they don't seem to have any issues. They're all eager to come to the U.S. So that's kind of the things I wish I would have known.
Yeah, there is a lot more hand-holding, and I think that things just take much longer than you anticipate them taking.
That's correct, definitely.
I think, and then obviously when you're flying overseas, when you're flying on a 12 or 14-hour or 18-hour flight, and you've got a big time change, you can't just pop over for 2 days. You have to make the commitment to stay for a while. Number one, because of your body and the time changes, and number two, because you're there that far, you want to try to maximize the time that you have there and use it wisely. Any food stories you want to share with us, Tom? Anything along those lines?
Any what?
Food stories.
Any food and beverage stories you want to share about India?
I actually like the food. But I usually eat only things that have been cooked. How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. And with a group going over to China, we know that the Chinese eat all the spare bits and parts, as we like to say. And so educating your exhibitors on not only, the culture, but on the food and what to order and what not to order, and having a list of restaurants and places for them to go is also equally important. I think that when we were doing shows in Mexico, one of the things that we had to really educate our exhibitors, particularly from the Midwest, no offense to the folks in the Midwest, was that lunch was from 3 to 5 and dinner wasn't until 9 or 10 at night. And they would get annoyed because restaurants weren't open at 6 o'clock for dinner. Besides the fact that our show hours were completely different. They went from 10 till 7, 11 to 8. And that was typical. Shows typically don't start at 8 o'clock in the morning in other places. Some do, but most don't. Mm-hmm. All right. With that, what we'd like to do is open it up for questions and answers. I believe that Arlene's moderating that, or if you have any questions, you can throw them up. You can tweet them as well. And let's see what we've got coming up here. From the audience, what countries are the most attractive to jump in right now in terms of ease of doing business with that and the economy? I would say, based on some panels that I just went to at the CISO CEO conference, everybody's really big on Mexico. Well, missed. Mexico, Indonesia, South Korea, when the Northern Koreans aren't going crazy, and Turkey. Turkey seems to be one of the biggest ones right now. Tom, what have you heard?
Agreed. Turkey is we're seeing more, a few more exhibitors from there. Certainly, Turkey's a big area. I think also Africa, people are starting to talk about that, as well as the ASEAN region. So anywhere from Indonesia to Thailand and some of those regions as well, sort of off mainland China.
Right. I would also say that, South Africa definitely, and there's something you have to realize. Like right now, there's turmoil going on in Turkey, but we don't think it's going to be a permanent bad place to do business. And in fact, Tarsus, which is TSNN's owner, has put a lot of money into that particular country, buying shows and partnering. Let's see, we've got another question from the audience. Is language a big issue, or translators easily available from local connections? Tom, what's your experience been?
I think it depends on the country. I was in India, obviously. Everyone speaks English. In Mexico, I had to, have a translator, have a partner that could translate for me. A funny little story. I sat at a board meeting once where I actually had the translator sit behind me and whisper in my ear for over an hour. So those are things you have to learn and get accustomed to. I did find that when I was in Southeast Asia last year that a lot of people do speak English, but you have to be prepared to be able to communicate, with the locals. And if you need translation, then you should invest in it and do it.
Yes, and for China, for example, we have 4 translators that we're going to be working with in our pavilion alone. So it's something that really have to do. You have to be able to speak their language. I'm also doing a presentation at one of their events, and they're translating it. Of course, I'm doing English. They're translating it to Mandarin as well.
Simultaneously, they're simultaneously translating it, which is sometimes good and sometimes bad. Usually, you can find interpreters. I prefer to use the word interpreter instead of translator. Translators, they go word for word, and interpreters are translating the meaning and the intent of what you're saying. And there truly is a huge difference. So those are really important to do. I found that it's really not a problem to find interpreters in other countries. And there are a lot of quality ones out there. You can also go to the universities and get assistance that way. There's always foreign students who are on exchange programs who are pretty happy to make some money and are usually pretty bright and will pick things up as well.
Yeah, and we do, like when we exhibit in a lot of international events, and we just did an event in Italy last year, and we always hire someone for our booth and make sure that they speak the local language, and then what we do is we find out who are the largest audience that comes and make sure that interpreter can speak the majority of those languages, and it helps a lot.
Yeah. So, for example, in China, the northern part of China speaks Mandarin, but the southern part speaks Cantonese. So you do have to actually pay attention to where you are in the country. Okay, our next question was from the audience. What countries are problematic to launch in? I think, going back to what Tom was talking about, when you've got a critical mass and you've got an interest, having a local partner eases things in. Obviously, fourth world countries, I know that UVM and Montgomery Exhibitions are doing shows in Nigeria, and some people have done shows in Libya, which are, kind of interesting. And, oh, my God, really, they're doing shows there? But, yes, they are. So, obviously, it's really important when you go across, when you go anywhere to make sure that, again, like both gentlemen were saying, that you have local partners, that you do have those people. Any other countries that you can think of, Tom?
Russia.
Problematic to launch in? Russia, yeah.
Just because it's difficult. I mean, we've looked into it, but it's challenging. And certainly Brazil has challenges, but most of those challenges are the country is just such a strong country, and everything is really internal. Mostly there is just getting equipment in and out, but you can certainly run great events in Brazil. Yeah,
and it does have a really strong history of trade shows.
Absolutely.
All right, so we have a question from Deb Webb. Any recommendations and tips when negotiating the facility and venue contracts abroad? I'll just start off with, not all venues are publicly owned. In fact, in Mexico, they're all privately owned. They don't get any taxes, so you are going to pay a higher rate. But that being said, you have to understand that when walking in. Tom, what have you found, having done shows in a couple of different places?
Yeah, I think that, I guess we kind of look at it as, it's not the biggest challenge as an organizer coming into the country is, are you going to lose in terms of a local organizer in terms of dates and venues, and can you keep those dates moving forward long term, and then also competitive issues. In the U.S. we sort of have a 30, 60, 90-day rule where you can't have a competitive event within those windows, and a lot of times in outside the U.S. I'm not sure that's the case. So you always have to watch that. But in terms of facilities, in Mexico, we felt like really we were just working with the U.S. We were at Central Banamex, so when you're in that facility, it's almost like a U.S. facility. But our experiences in India is they've been very, they're happy to have us, and they're trying to fill their facilities, so things have been great.
Which is really, really good. Larry, why don't you speak to working with other show organizers in terms of the reciprocal pavilions?
Sure. The challenges with contracts aren't as great with the pavilions because you're basically doing a reciprocal agreement with the other show organizer. So basically, whatever we want to do for example, with the UK show or the China show, they would get the same exact things at our show in North America. So it's you just have to have that close relationship where you know what the expectations are of them, and they know what your expectations are, so you're all on the same page, and I think that's pretty much the key is that relationship.
And the other thing is that when you're also working with other show organizers, it's really easy to really maximize the publicity, and it is a big deal. It is a big deal to have international pavilions.
Oh, it is because
it is newsworthy,
right.
And you get the global trade involved, don't you?
Oh, you do, and you get the industry in the industry's trade publications. You get tremendous coverage of doing this, we found we're on the front page of numerous British trade press because of this arrangement. So lots of PR.
There really is. All right, we've got another question from the audience. Do you have extra security issues when you go overseas, and is that an extra expense? I think that you always have to bring your brain with you when you travel overseas, and you need to do a little bit of research ahead of time. For example, in Mexico, you just don't grab a taxi on the street, you hire a car. And sometimes it's more expedient, to travel around. Tom, have you encountered any interesting security issues?
Well, in Mexico, the security was actually fairly strict. In terms of, anyone that came on the floor with a laptop, they had to be tagged and the serial numbers written down. It was actually became an inconvenience for a lot of our exhibitors, although they were trying to protect people's products. So we were pretty pleased with what was going on there, and certainly we're going to learn when we go to India what we need to do. But a lot of it is just educating your exhibitors, just like you do on your U.S. shows, about being smart when you're displaying equipment, when not leaving equipment in the booth, and the traditional things, and working with your local partner and understanding the venue, the facility, and certainly I think a lot of it depends on the country that you're going to. In Europe, I don't anticipate as many issues as I would if I was in as you said, a third world country where there may be other issues, and the venues are more open and easier access and not as secured.
Yeah, right. And there are certain countries where if you steal, you lose a hand. Dubai and the UAE. In China, they're very, very they don't like thieves, and so you tend to get a lot of pretty straight up things. I've been in shopping centers and dropped some money, and somebody stopped me and said, "There's your money." So it really does depend again on the culture, and it's best to just always be safe along those lines. Larry?
Well, the other thing is it's not necessarily security, but we've actually found in China that they're doing a better job of policing intellectual property than we are here in the U.S. They have their lawyers and attorneys right on site at the show policing this kind of thing, where our attorneys here in the U.S. say, don't you dare touch that. So it's a little bit surprising, but pleasantly surprised.
Absolutely. Well, are there any more questions? According to Arlene, we don't really have any, but if we have any last-minute questions, be happy to answer them. Otherwise, I'd really like to thank Tom and Larry very much, and TSNN for the opportunity to talk about taking your show overseas. Make sure that you check back on tsnn.com, webinars for recording of this session. Let your friends know and your colleagues know. And with that, we'd really just like to say thank you for taking the time today to join us. And we hope you got something out of this as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Ladies and gentlemen, this does conclude today's teleconference. We thank you for your participation. You may disconnect your lines at this time and have a great day.